The hall was silent, an unnerving silence, the kind that made your skin crawl and your breath hitch. The air smelled of ancient stone and burned incense, the only sounds coming from the soft shuffle of shoes against polished floors and the rustling of royal robes. An audience of intergalactic leaders, ambassadors and royal officials from a dozen planets filled the massive chamber. They had all gathered to witness something unprecedented, something that had never occurred in the history of the universe. The grand hall, once echoing with the proud voices of royalty, now stood in hushed anticipation as the ancient scroll was unfurled by the royal scribe. The king's will was about to be read. At the far end of the room, behind a high throne, the alien princesses stood, majestic, regal, and disdainful. They were a breathtaking sight, tall, otherworldly, with iridescent skin that shimmered under the lights. Their faces, a mix of sharp elegance and cold arrogance, were twisted in expressions of indifference. They had mocked Earth for centuries, calling it a backward, primitive world. It was a source of endless amusement for them, their pitying gaze, directed at the human race that in their minds was destined for extinction. But today was different. The scroll was slowly opened, and the silence deepened. All eyes turned toward the scribe as he began to read in the old tongue, his voice trembling ever so slightly. By the will of King Trion, the ruler of the galaxies, protector of the empire, the time of succession has come. His Majesty, in his infinite wisdom, has chosen his successor. A pause. A soft murmur rippled through the gathered assembly. None of them had been prepared for this. None of them had known. The king had been ill for months, and his mysterious illness had led to speculation. Would his daughter, Princess Zalra, ascend the throne? Or perhaps one of the other princesses, each of whom had long been groomed for power? Instead, the scribe's voice rang out once more. The successor is Earth's chosen heir. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. The room was still, and the princess's expressions shifted ever so slightly. Shock, confusion, and then barely masked contempt. The alien diplomats exchanged looks, their minds racing. "Earth!" one of the princesses muttered under her breath, her voice dripping with disdain. "A primitive, insignificant world. How can it possibly?" The scribe, unfazed by the growing tension, continued, oblivious to the chaos stirring beneath the surface. "By the will of the king, Earth's representative, one human, shall inherit the entire empire of the trio's regime." The princesses exchanged glances, their faces masks of disbelief. "Who?" one of them finally demanded, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "What human—" The scribe cleared his throat and turned the scroll around. The name was scrawled in bold, unmistakable letters. John McAllister. A ripple of disbelief washed over the room. Who was this human? John McAllister. Earth's history was filled with thousands of people who could barely be remembered, let alone one who could inherit the fate of entire alien empires. The princesses stared at the name as if it was some kind of joke. One of them, Zalra, the eldest princess, let out a mocking laugh. A human, a pathetic creature from Earth, that insignificant mudball of a planet. How absurd! She turned to her sisters. He must be a fool. The room was filled with murmurs, some quiet laughter, others filled with uncertainty. The very idea of a human, someone from Earth, a species they had ridiculed for eons, being named ruler of their empire, was laughable. But before the crowd could erupt into chaos, the scribe spoke again, his voice commanding attention. His Majesty has left specific instructions. The inheritance includes not only the empire, but also its most precious assets, the 3 princesses of trios. As per his will, they shall serve under the humans' leadership. They are bound by his authority. The room went deathly silent again. No one had expected this. The princesses stood motionless, their faces unreadable, as if someone had struck them silent. To serve under a human, the thought was unthinkable. They had been born to rule, respected and feared across galaxies. Their power was absolute, but now they were bound to this human. The very idea was revolting. "Where is he?" one of the alien ambassadors asked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Where is this John McAllister?" A moment later, the doors to the grand hall creaked open, and in stepped a figure that none of them had been prepared for. A man, tall but ordinary by their standards. No armor, no regal cloak, just a simple human dressed in the dark suit of an Earth bureaucrat, a face that was unremarkable save for the fire in his eyes. John McAllister. He stood at the entrance. For a moment, eyes scanning the room, his heart racing in his chest. He had been just an ordinary man until today, a bureaucrat working for the Earth government, forgotten by history. But now he stood at the center of an intergalactic storm, his very existence shaking the foundations of the Empire. The princesses exchanged glares. Zalra, the eldest, sneered as she took a step forward, her voice smooth and venomous. "So you are the human who is to inherit our empire? Tell me, what makes you so special?" John's eyes narrowed, his heart pounding in his chest, but his voice was steady. "I don't know, I never asked for this. But it seems I have no choice." Zalra's lip curled in disgust. "You may wear our crown, human, but don't think for one moment you'll be able to command us. We've been born to rule. You are nothing." John didn't flinch. His gaze was steady. "Maybe, but it looks like the king disagreed." The princesses seethed in silence, unable to argue, while the entire hall held its breath. The truth had just hit them. Earth, once a forgotten, mocked planet, had just gained the most powerful position in the galaxy, and John McAllister was the man who now held that power. Cliffhanger. But what was the real reason behind the king's choice? And what did the strange artifact he had left behind mean? John's gaze flickered briefly to a glowing, intricately designed box resting on the throne. It pulsed with an energy that felt almost alive. He had to touch it. But the moment he did, he felt something, an alien force trying to reach inside his very mind. What had he inherited? The scribe handed him the artifact. The room waited. John McAllister sat in the royal chamber, the weight of the situation pressing down on his shoulders. The enormous hall, bathed in an otherworldly glow from distant stars, now felt like a cage. His mind was racing, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The king's will had turned his life upside down. One moment, he was a low-ranking bureaucrat on Earth. The next, he was the heir to an entire alien empire. His hands trembled as he looked at the strange artifact resting in his palm, a sleek, metallic box that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. The moment he touched it, a cold shiver had run through his body, as if the object had a mind of its own. The room around him blurred, and for an instant he had felt an ancient presence. Something ancient, powerful, and far beyond his understanding. But now the artifact sat before him, calm and still. He could feel its weight in his chest, a strange pressure that seemed to vibrate beneath his ribs. What was it? And why had the king chosen him for this? The princesses were still watching him, their eyes filled with a mixture of contempt, curiosity, and disbelief. Zalra, the eldest princess, stood tall at the front, her glowing skin casting a faint light across the room. Her gaze was sharp, piercing, as though she were trying to decipher John's very soul. Behind her, her sisters, each more regal and ethereal than the last, exchanged whispers, their alien features locked in solemn, calculating expressions. Zalra stepped forward, her voice cold and measured. "So, human, what is it that you plan to do now? You are the ruler according to the king's will. What will you do with such power?" John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The idea of ruling an empire, a galactic empire no less, was beyond his wildest dreams. But even more than that, he felt a deep unease. He hadn't asked for this. Hell, he hadn't even been aware of it. He wasn't equipped to rule an empire, and certainly not one that was made up of beings far more advanced than humanity. "I don't know," he said, his voice steady, though he felt anything but calm. "I didn't ask for this, but it seems I have no choice." Zalra's lip curled in disdain. "No choice? You don't even understand what you're dealing with, human. This empire has been ruled by my family for centuries, and now you think you can step in and lead it?" She flicked her wrist dismissively. "We've known of Earth, of your pitiful world. You've been nothing but an amusement to us, your primitive ways, your backward technology. Yet now you are our ruler." Her sisters chuckled in agreement, their laughter like the sound of chimes in the wind. They were beautiful and dangerous, their alien eyes gleaming with hidden malice. They had all been raised to rule, their lives molded by a destiny that had always seemed untouchable. Until now. John felt the sting of their words, but he refused to show weakness. He had been a part of Earth's bureaucracy, a system designed to make decisions, to manage and organize. If nothing else, he could do that. He didn't need to be a warrior, a scholar, or even a king to manage. He just needed to understand what was at stake and what these princesses were so afraid of. "I don't need to be a ruler to lead," John replied, his voice gaining strength. "I just need to do what's right." Zalra's eyes narrowed. "What's right? How typical of a human. You think you can simply walk in here and fix everything with your morals. Let me tell you something, human. This empire doesn't run on morals. It runs on power. And you, with your weak, fragile human mind, are no match for the power that courses through these veins." She gestured to herself and her sisters, the alien royalty who had been born to command. "You think you're fit to control us? Fit to command the forces of the galaxy? You're nothing more than a puppet, a figurehead. And we will bend you to our will." John could feel the weight of her words, but something inside him, something buried deep within the artifact, pushed back. The pressure in his chest intensified, a subtle pulse that seemed to come from within the very air around him. His fingers gripped the box tighter, and suddenly the artifact hummed to life, its energy seeming to surge outward, filling the room. For a moment, the princesses froze, their expressions flickering between confusion and alarm. Zalra took a step back, her eyes widening. What is this?" John's eyes glowed faintly, and the air in the room began to crackle with energy. He felt something awakening inside him, something tied to the artifact. The power within it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It wasn't just a tool, it was a force, a living entity that seemed to recognize him, respond to his presence. Zalra's voice shook slightly. You're controlling it?" She stepped forward again, her stance more aggressive now. "Impossible. No human should be able to wield such power. What are you?" John's heart raced. He didn't have the answers, but he could feel the artifact resonating with his very being. He felt stronger, more alive than ever before, as if the artifact was unlocking something deep within him. A flood of memories, strange and foreign, swept through his mind. Visions of a galactic war, ancient alien civilizations, and a prophecy that spoke of a human rising to lead. He gripped the artifact tighter, his breath coming faster. "I don't know what this is, but it's mine now, and I'm going to find out why I was chosen, why Earth was chosen." The room fell silent. Even Zalra seemed unsure of how to respond, her usual confidence rattled by the strange power emanating. From John, the princesses exchanged uneasy glances, each one now understanding that something beyond their control had just been unleashed. "Then you'll regret it," Zalra finally said, her voice laced with venom. "Mark my words, human. You may think you understand what's happening, but you don't. You've awakened something dangerous. John met her gaze, feeling the strength that had been awakened inside him. Then show me what's dangerous. I'm not backing down. The princess's expressions darkened, and the tension in the room was palpable. John knew this wasn't over, far from it. But one thing was certain. He was no longer the meek bureaucrat he had been just hours ago. He was something more, and if he was going to survive this, he would need to understand the artifact, understand his new role, and most importantly, understand the true reason Earth had been chosen. The days following the king's reading of the will were unlike anything John McAllister had ever experienced. The halls of the palace, that had once seemed imposing, now felt like a labyrinth, a prison he could never escape. Everywhere he went, whispers followed him. The courtiers, the soldiers, even the alien dignitaries looked at him with a mixture of pity, contempt, and, most unsettling of all, fear. John had never wanted power. He had never asked for it. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that the artifact, the strange, glowing box, wasn't just some relic left behind by a dying king. It was a key, and John was its unwitting holder. Every time he touched it, strange visions flooded his mind. The pulse of ancient energy seemed to sync with his heartbeat, as though the artifact had found something in him, something it wanted to awaken. Zalra, the eldest princess, had warned him, "You don't know what you're meddling with." But John didn't have the luxury of fear. Not when Earth's survival was tied to his success. Not when the fate of entire galaxies hung in the balance. If the artifact had a purpose, if it was part of the reason he was chosen, he would find out what it was, no matter the cost. The princesses still refused to acknowledge him as their ruler. Zalra's icy demeanor never wavered, and the other two princesses, Sivra and Lyra, followed suit, maintaining their distance. But it was more than just an unwillingness to accept his position. There was something darker brewing beneath the surface. The royal court, an intricate web of political alliances and hidden agendas, was beginning to unravel. John could feel the eyes of every alien noble and general upon him, and none of them were content with the status quo. They viewed him as an outsider, a temporary leader whose true purpose had yet to be understood. John's only ally, if you could even call him that, was a quiet advisor named Kale. He was an alien of an entirely different species, humanoid in form, but with skin that shimmered like liquid silver. Kyle had been one of the king's closest confidants, but his role had become increasingly ambiguous. Since the king's death, he had been the one to initially explain the basics of the galactic politics that John now found himself tangled in. "You need to trust no one, McAllister," Kyle had told him the night before, his voice low and urgent. "Not even the princesses. This empire is built on deception, and the moment you lower your guard, they'll turn on you. Trust me when I say this. The king's will wasn't just a gift, it was a test." John had wanted to believe Kale, but the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders made it hard to trust anyone, even him. And then there was the matter of the artifact. Kyle seemed to know more about it than he was letting on, but every time John tried to press him for more information, Kyle would change the subject or offer vague answers. Tonight, however, Kale's expression was different. There was an urgency in his eyes, a quiet fear that John hadn't seen before. "You've been set up," Kyle whispered, stepping closer to John in the private chambers. "The princesses are not just your subordinates. They are playing a game. Game far more dangerous than you realize." John stared at him, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean? What game?" The king, he wasn't just a ruler. He was a strategist, a master of galactic politics. He knew his empire was crumbling. His will wasn't just an inheritance, it was a final maneuver in a much larger plan. Earth was never meant to be a part of this empire, McAllister. The human, Race wasn't meant to inherit anything. You're part of something much bigger. John frowned, trying to piece the fragmented words together. You're saying the king's choice wasn't random, that there's a larger plot at play. Kyle nodded gravely. Yes, but there's more. The princesses, especially Zalra, they aren't just arrogant. They're hiding something from you. They were complicit in a scheme that could bring down this entire empire. But they didn't count on you. They didn't count on the artifact's power aligning with you. John's hand instinctively reached for the artifact, which was now resting on a pedestal nearby. The pulsing light seemed to grow brighter in Kyle's presence, almost as though it were reacting to his emotions. "Why don't they want me to have the artifact?" John asked, his voice thick with suspicion. "Because," Kyle replied softly, "it's not just a tool of power, it's the key to a secret that could destroy them all. And they know it." John felt his stomach drop. There were too many secrets swirling around him, too many unknowns. He had already felt the artifact's power, but this was something deeper, something more sinister than he had realized. "I need to speak to Zalra," John said, standing abruptly. "I need answers. I can't sit here any longer, wondering if I'm being played." Kale's face darkened. "I wouldn't advise that. Zalra is dangerous, McAllister. If you push her too far, you'll find yourself surrounded by enemies on all sides." But John wasn't listening. He had come too far to back down now. If the princesses were involved in something as dangerous as Kyle suggested, he needed to confront them directly. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. The heart of the trio's empire was not its sprawling palaces or its glittering cities. It was not even its vast fleets of warships, nor the advanced technologies that made the alien races of the galaxy so formidable. No, the true heart of the empire lay in the ancient and hidden archives beneath the royal palace, the place where secrets were kept, where the past was buried, and where the future of the galaxy was written in forgotten tomes. John McAllister had never expected to be standing in this place. He had come to the palace, a simple bureaucrat from Earth, and now, just weeks later, he was standing at the edge of the galaxy's most powerful empire, an empire that was in the midst of unraveling. The princesses had remained silent for the past several days, each of them retreating into their own domains, hiding behind their royal duties and maintaining a facade of indifference. Zalra, the eldest, had grown even more distant, as though the presence of the artifact in John's hands had unsettled her to the core. Her mocking smiles had turned into glares, and her once immense arrogance was now tempered by fear. John had sensed it. He had sensed that something was amiss. Kyle's warnings echoed in his mind. The princesses were hiding something, and if he wanted to uncover the truth, he would have to dig deeper than any surface-level conversation would allow. The archives were deep within the palace, hidden beneath layers of stone and energy shields, accessible only to the highest-ranking members of the royal court. To get inside, John had needed a special key, something that only the king's direct heirs could access. Naturally, Zalra had refused to hand over her key, despite the fact that it was his right as the ruler of the empire. But Kyle had helped. The silver-skinned alien had been both a guide and an enigma. He'd told John of an old secret passage that led directly to the archives, bypassing the royal guards and the princess's control over the palace's higher security measures. It was risky, but in this world of high-stakes power and deception, it was the only way forward. Now, standing at the entrance to the archives, John felt the weight of the empire pressing down on him. The walls surrounding him seemed to hum with ancient power, and as he stepped inside, the temperature dropped, the air thick with centuries of knowledge. Books and scrolls lined the walls, stacked in towering piles that reached the ceiling. The place was vast, a labyrinth of corridors that led to forgotten rooms and hidden vaults. But what John sought wasn't buried in the dust of forgotten knowledge. It was locked away in the deepest chamber of all. He felt it in his bones, the pull of destiny. He wasn't just here to uncover a family secret. He was here to unlock the truth, the one thing that would change everything. The artifact in his possession was more than just a key to the throne. It was a key to the galaxy's survival. As John moved deeper into the archives, his fingers brushing the spines of countless ancient texts, he could feel the presence of the artifact vibrating in his chest. It was alive, connected to something far older than any of the alien species who ruled the galaxy. He wasn't just an heir, he was part of a greater plan, one that had been set in motion long before he was born. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind him. "You shouldn't be here." John turned sharply, his heart racing as he saw Zalra standing in the doorway. Her eyes were narrowed and her posture was tense, as if she were ready to pounce. For a moment, she looked every bit the regal, untouchable princess, cold, calculating and dangerous. But there was something different in her expression now, something vulnerable. "I told you I needed answers," John said, his voice steady, though the encounter was growing more tense by the second. "This empire, these princesses, they're hiding something. I want to know what." Zalra's eyes flashed with something, anger perhaps, or fear, but she didn't immediately speak. Instead, she stepped into the room, her movements deliberate, measured. "You think you can just waltz into this place and uncover our secrets? You think you have a right to know everything about us?" "I have every right," John shot back, his patience fraying. "I'm the ruler of this empire. Your king left me this empire, and I want to know what he knew, what he was hiding." She took a step closer, her gaze cold and calculating. "You're not ready for the truth. None of you humans are. The king knew it. That's why he left you the artifact. He wanted you to have it, but not without the consequences." John felt a chill creep down his spine. "What consequences?" Zalra's lips curved into a bitter smile. "You think Earth was chosen at random, that it was some cosmic mistake? No, McAllister. Earth was chosen because it's the last bastion of something the galaxy can't afford to lose." John frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You've been raised on lies," Zalra said, her voice softer now, though the edge of bitterness still lingered. "The trio's empire was not built on power alone. It was built on a secret, something ancient, something far older than any of the royal bloodlines. The artifact you hold is not just a symbol of power. It's a weapon that can destroy everything we've built." John's mind raced. He had known there was more to the artifact, but this revelation, it shook him to his core. A weapon. Earth was never meant to be part of this empire, and now it seemed that the very thing he had inherited could lead to the empire's destruction. Zalra stepped even closer, her eyes locked onto his. "The king wasn't just trying to preserve his empire. He was trying to protect it from itself. The artifact you hold, it's connected to a force that could unravel the very fabric of reality." John's breath caught in his throat. "What force?" "The source," she whispered, her voice filled with an ancient, almost reverent fear. "A power beyond even the trio's empire. The king tried to keep it contained, but the artifact, the key, was never meant to be wielded by anyone who wasn't prepared for its consequences." She stepped back, her gaze cold again. "And now, you're the one who must face those consequences." The stars outside the windows of the royal palace glimmered like diamonds in a dark sea, a vast, infinite expanse that stretched beyond the comprehension of any mortal mind. John McAllister stood at the edge of the balcony, his eyes scanning the stars. It was hard to grasp the magnitude of what he had learned, of what had unfolded in the past weeks. Earth was no longer just a small, insignificant planet. He was the ruler of an empire that stretched across galaxies. And yet, it felt like everything was teetering on the edge of collapse. The artifact that had once seemed so mysterious to him, now pulsed with an energy that was both alien and familiar. It had become an extension of himself, its power now intimately tied to his own. The visions came more frequently now, flashes of the past, of wars long forgotten, of civilizations that had risen and fallen in the blink of an eye. The source, the force that Zalra had mentioned, was still a mystery, but John could feel its pull. It was something far beyond anything he had ever imagined, and yet it was a force that he was bound to control. There was no escaping it. The door to the balcony slid open behind him, and Kale, the silver-skinned advisor, stepped out. His expression was grim, as if he had something important to say, something that could change the course of everything. "You're still here," Kyle said softly, his voice betraying a hint of concern. "I thought you'd have gone to the throne room by now." John turned to face him. "I'm not ready to sit on that throne, Kyle. Not yet. I still don't understand everything. I'm just trying to make sense of all of this." Kyle stepped closer, his face thoughtful. "You have no choice. The final confrontation is coming. Zalra and her sisters have made their move. The princesses are no longer just playing politics. They've chosen a side." John's stomach churned. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing it from Kyle made it feel all too real. The princesses, the ones who had mocked him from the beginning, were now ready to turn against him. They had been hiding something from him, something deep and dangerous, and John was about to find out exactly what that was. "What do you mean?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What side?" Kyle's gaze darkened. "The princesses are trying to seize the power of the artifact. They want to control the source. And they know that if they don't act now, you will gain complete control over it. They won't let that happen." John's heart raced as he processed Kale's words. The princesses had been playing their own game all along, using him as a pawn in their political schemes. But now they were ready to take matters into their own hands. "How do we stop them?" John asked, his mind already running through possible strategies. He knew he couldn't trust the princesses anymore. Zalra, with her cold arrogance, and her sisters, Sivra and Lyra, who had been content to stay in the background until now. Kyle hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering with something John couldn't quite read. The artifact is the key, but it's not just a weapon. It's a conduit to the source. The power to control the galaxy lies within you, McAllister. But it's not something you can wield alone. You need to form alliances. You need to unite those who still believe in the Empire, and in you. John took a deep breath, the weight of Kale's words settling over him like a heavy cloak. The stakes were higher than ever before. This wasn't just about ruling an empire anymore. This was about survival, the survival of Earth, the survival of the galaxy, and the survival of everything he had come to understand about power. "I'll do whatever it takes," John said, his voice firm. "But I need to know everything. I need to understand the source. What is it? And how do I stop the princesses from taking control?" Kyle's gaze softened for a moment, and he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The source is an ancient invoice. It predates the trio's empire and every other civilization in this galaxy. It is the foundation of all life, all power. It has the potential to create or destroy, and those who control it control everything." John's mind was racing. The source, it sounded like something out of myth, something too powerful for anyone to wield. And yet here he was, standing at the precipice of that very power. "The artifact," Kale continued, "is the key to unlocking the source. It was never meant to be wielded by any one person. It's a test that the king was preparing for when he made his final choice." "But why Earth?" John asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Why was I chosen? Why not one of the princesses?" Kale's eyes darkened, and he stepped back, his expression distant. "Because Earth is the last hope. The source has the power to heal the galaxy, or destroy it. The princesses know this. They are willing to risk everything for the power to control it. But they don't understand it like you do. John frowned. What do you mean? I don't understand it either. How can I control something like that? Cale's gaze softened. You have something they don't, McAllister. You have humanity. The king knew that a human with all the frailties and flaws of your species would be the only one capable of wielding the source responsibly. The princesses, cold, calculating, they are too removed from the reality of life. You, as human, you have the empathy, the connection to the universe that they lack. That is why you were chosen. John was silent for a moment, absorbing Kyle's words. It was hard to believe that he, a simple human from Earth, had been chosen for such a monumental task. But as he stood there, looking out at the stars, he began to understand. I'll stop them, John said, his voice hardening with resolve. I'll stop Zalra and her sisters. I'll stop them from using the source for their own gain. Kyle nodded, his expression serious. Be careful, McAllister. They won't back down. Zalra will do whatever it takes to get what she wants. And she knows that if you control the source, the entire galaxy will fall under your rule. John's eyes narrowed. Then let them come. I'm ready. The air in the throne room was thick with tension. John McAllister stood at the center of the vast chamber, surrounded by alien soldiers, royal guards, and the princesses themselves. The massive room, once a symbol of the trio's empire's power, now felt like a battlefield, a place where the fate of the galaxy would be decided. Zalra, Sivra, and Lyra stood across from him, their eyes burning with defiance. The artifact pulsed with energy in John's hands, its power a constant steady hum beneath his skin. He could feel it, more strongly than ever before. It was no longer just a tool, it was part of him, a part of Earth, and the princesses knew that if he controlled it, he would control the galaxy. Zalra stepped forward, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. You think you can wield the source, human? You think you can change the balance of the galaxy with your, what? Your humanity? You're nothing compared to the power of the trio's empire. John's heart raced, but his voice was calm. You're wrong, Zalra. It's not about power. It's about what's right. You've spent your entire lives building an empire on lies, manipulation, and control. But that ends now. She laughed bitterly. And what do you know about what's right? What could a mere human possibly understand about the forces that govern the universe? John held up the artifact, its light flaring brighter with each passing second. The princesses took a collective step back, their faces a mix of awe and fear. I know that the source isn't something to be controlled. It's a force that can heal or destroy. It's not about ruling. It's about balance. And I will make sure it's used for the good of the galaxy, not for the greed of those who seek to dominate it. Zalra's expression twisted into a snarl. You think you can stop us? We've been preparing for this moment our entire lives. You, a human, have no idea what you're facing. John's gaze never wavered. He had come too far to back down now. He had seen the vision, the ancient cosmic force that the source was connected to, and he knew it wasn't something that could be controlled by anyone. Not Zalra, not him, but together maybe they could guide it toward a new future. We don't have to fight each other, John said, his voice steady. We don't have to destroy what's been built. We can rebuild together. Zalra's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. You truly believe that? John nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yes, I do. But if you try to take control of the source, if you try to use it to dominate the galaxy, I will stop you. For a moment, the room was deathly silent. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time the princesses seemed unsure. They had always believed in their superiority, in the inevitability of their rule. But John was different. He wasn't a typical ruler. He wasn't driven by power or greed. He was driven by something deeper, something that none of them could have predicted. You think you can change everything with words? Zalra spat. You don't understand the source. You don't understand what you're dealing with. But before John could respond, a sharp, crackling sound filled the room. The lights above flickered, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. John's eyes widened as he felt the power of the artifact surge, filling the chamber with a blinding light. Zalra staggered back, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" she shouted. John clenched his fists, focusing on the artifact. The visions were becoming clearer now, more vivid. He could see the source, a swirling mass of energy and light connected to everything. To the stars, to the planets, to all life. It wasn't just a weapon, it was the foundation of all existence. And John had to find a way to protect it from those who would seek to use it for destruction. The princesses seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. They too felt the surge of power, the overwhelming force that was coursing through the room. It wasn't just the artifact, it was the source itself, reacting to the presence of someone who wasn't supposed to wield it. John's mind raced. He knew what he had to do. The source was too powerful for any one individual to control. The galaxy had to learn to work together to find a new path forward, one of balance, not dominance. But there was one more thing, one final revelation that would change everything. "I've seen it," John said, his voice filled with awe. "I've seen the truth. The source doesn't belong to anyone. It's not meant to be controlled. It's a part of the universe itself, and if we keep trying to use it for our own gain, it will destroy us all." The princesses stood frozen, their faces pale. They had spent their lives seeking power, and now they were confronted with the truth that they could not deny. The source was not a tool. It was the very fabric of life, the force that connected everything in the galaxy. And it could not be wielded by any one being, no matter how powerful. The light from the artifact began to dim, its energy calming. John took a step forward, his voice resolute. "We need to let it go. We need to trust in the balance of the universe. Only then can we rebuild, not as rulers, but as caretakers." Zalra, her eyes still filled with defiance, slowly lowered her gaze. She had been a product of her upbringing, taught to see the galaxy as something to be conquered, something to be controlled. But now, for the first time, she was confronted with a new reality, a reality where power wasn't the key to survival. "You're right," Zalra whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never understood. I thought I was the chosen one. I thought I was meant to rule." John nodded, his gaze softening. "We all thought we were meant for something, but we're all part of something much bigger. We can't control it. We can only live with it." The room fell silent once more, the weight of the decision settling over them. John had done it. He had confronted the princesses, and in doing so, he had unlocked the true power of the source, not through dominance, but through understanding. The princesses stood together, their expressions unreadable. They had come to realize the truth, just as John had. They were no longer the rulers of the galaxy. They were its stewards, its caretakers, and together they would guide the galaxy into a new era, one of cooperation, balance, and respect. Tiku, artifact, its energy now subdued, rested silently in John's hands. The power it held was still vast, but it was no longer a threat. It was a part of the universe, a force to be respected, not controlled. As the light from the artifact faded, John turned to the princesses. "It's time to rebuild," he said softly. "Together." The galaxy had changed, and with it so had humanity. The human race, once considered insignificant, had proven itself worthy, not through strength, but through understanding. And, as John McAllister stood there, surrounded by the remnants of an empire, he knew one thing for certain: the legacy of Earth would live on. The end